business of the common people is not oft told in history books, and Parenti made it his job to tell the stories of Fra Guy Martino, Clam, Banjo, Al Ross Rossellini, Randy Bowe, Vito Marcantonio, and even Mrs. Meyer, who was a working woman. This is what he calls in Julius Caesar, writing history from the bottom up. And why would he want to do that? The answer brings me back to East Harlem and to my clothes. Waiting for yesterday, the author tells of the time when he and his mother were watching Gone with the Wind, when a scene where all the belles retire to nap for the afternoon while they are fanned into cool comfort by the slaves. He says, my mother and I found this scene distasteful. They sure are served hand and foot, she remarked disapprovingly of the fancy ladies. She was identifying with the slaves. So was I. It was a matter not of race, but class, although we never explicitly used the term. We identified with the slaves who toiled like draft animals and not with the plantation aristocrats who were so lavishly served. We were poor. There would never be anyone fanning us in hot weather. It's not about race. As Marcantonio taught, so saw Parenti and his mom, who their actual and natural allies were. Remember what and where the Parenti came from. Quote, the Mezzogiorno was impoverished because of centuries of exploitation by aristocratic rulers, Vatican landowners, and foreign occupation. The plunder from above created severe poverty and desperation below. The harshness suffered by those at the bottom had a distorting effect on their life chances and life attitudes. Survival became the prime preoccupation. East Harlem, naturally, or as a result, was inhabited mostly by hard-working and usually underpaid proletarians, more or less sane folks who were ordinary heroes of the landscape. Here, the working poor lived out their lives largely unsung and unnoticed. Michael Parenti sings that song and makes their arguments for them as well. His belief in the power of one class to repress another and its universal application is deep and wide. He sets out, for example, to demystify the purported treasuring of children in Italian immigrant families. He says, they sent their young ones to work at an early age and expropriated their earnings. For most of the immigrant adults, there was little possibility to face the world with ease and tenderness. Expropriated. This is the expression of a profound sense of the natural right one has to their own person and labor, even in childhood. Ease and tenderness. In a market-driven world, even these come at a price. Like Marcantonio, Parenti has worked to connect goings-on in the larger world with what was happening in the neighborhood, tying the global to the local. He notes years later, as the family moved out of East Harlem and siblings put deprivations and insecurities of the immigrant family behind them and mellowed with age and post-war prosperity and the advent of children and grandchildren of their own, they tended to get along much better with each other. It was a good example of how relations within the larger society influence personal relations. I'm closing here. Parenti himself has been both forceful and lucky in transcending his working class background, and he knows it. Quote, I'm greatly indebted to progressive individuals of generations before, whose names I do not even know, who fought for the principle of higher education, the idea that a worker's child can get a degree, and venture into reserves that are usually open to the offspring of affluent families. He gave back. For him, betterment was not defined in terms of material advancement, winning out against others on the job market. His values have been of peace and justice, fair play, environmental sustainability, for communal caring, and power sharing. We know from Waiting for Yesterday that he was pounded by police at demonstrations, and that in 1974 he ran for Congress in Vermont on the Liberty Union party ticket, which may have been something like getting beaten up by the demonstration. From his Contrary Notions collection, we know his political writings and actions cost him an academic post at the University of Vermont and a position at Brooklyn College. An eternal angry young man, born in 1933, he did not stop. Waiting for Yesterday is his chance to tell one common man's uncommon story and the stories of the common men and women around him. Before the gentlemen historians of tomorrow choose to forget both he and they. He has dedicated his life to this class he describes again in Julius Caesar. They who struggled against all odds, with all the fear and courage of ordinary human beings, whose names we shall never know, whose blood and tears we shall never see, whose cries of hope and pain we will never hear, To them we are linked by a past that is never dead nor ever really past. And so, when the best pages of history are finally written, it will not be by princes, presidents, prime ministers, pundits, nor even professors, but by the people themselves. For all their shortcomings, the people are all we have. Indeed,